All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Hope all is well with those of you who will be joining me for the broadcast today. This is our inaugural edition. We know that today is Inauguration Day, and we are actually broadcasting live from here in the capital area, the DMV as it's called, DC, Maryland, Virginia. So welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. This is our inauguration edition, and we are broadcasting live right here from the DMV area, which stands for DC, Maryland, and Virginia, for those of you who are not in the Beltway. We're just thankful to be here today and to be on today. We're excited about life. We're excited about just all of the different things that are going to go down in history on today. So this is, as I said, it's our inauguration edition, and we are here in the DMV. Good morning, good morning. And Rock Studios, you can feel free to click on any of those statements that come up that are inappropriate and just block them. So that's what we're going to be doing this morning for those who cannot conduct themselves as citizens on the broadcast today. All right, so let's get started with what we have going on in our program. And the first thing that we're going to start out with is our word of the day, which comes from Philippians 4, verses 6 through 7, which is, "Do not be anxious about anything. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." I always like to say that no matter who is president, Jesus is king. And so if you live by that standard, then you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. So that is our word for today, Philippians 4, 6 through 7. And you don't have to worry. We're not a people that worry. I find our vocabulary word for today to be quite appropriate. And that vocabulary word for the day is ignominious. Ignominious. I'll say it again. And I'm sharing it also with our YouTube live stream audience as well. So just remember that if anything goes wrong with your Periscope broadcast, you can click in my bio and switch over to our YouTube live stream, which will keep going on. So ignominious is our word for today, and it actually means deserving shame or disgrace. For example, used in a sentence, it was an ignominious end to a campaign. We know that there's lots of things that have been going on and happening that have deserved some shame, some rightful shame and disgrace to it. But we know that God is in control of everything and everyone, whether they want to believe it or not. All right, so let's take a look at some of our news stories for today. A big news story that came out late yesterday was the fact that President-elect Trump plans to eliminate 25 violence against women grant programs. Now, this is kind of a slap in the face to the women who voted for him because he plans to cut violence against women grant programs as a way to cut spending. But this actually fits right in line with his personality and with the jingoism that we have seen throughout his campaign and throughout his administration. And what is jingoism? That's that extreme chauvinistic patriotism that we have been seeing that has been a consistent theme throughout his campaign. So, of course, it would make sense for those who are in his campaign who don't really have a sense of care or compassion for women. It would make sense for his administration to want to cut 25 violence against women grant programs as a way to cut spending. Altogether, it says that these cuts would save the U.S. federal government 10.5 trillion over 10 years, but the discount is not worth its without its cost to the American people. The Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women oversees a total of 25 programs which distribute funds to organizations committed to ending sexual assault, domestic abuse, and dating violence. So if you look at this administration, if you look at their lack of respect for women, it's actually not surprising that they would want to cut organizations that would actually benefit women's health, and to keep women protected and safe. All right. Here's the next news article coming from Vox.com, and I found this to be very interesting and actually very true, having lived at one point in a town that was 87% white and about, I don't know, maybe 5-6% black. White America is quietly self-segregating. Now, they will tell you that they're not, but unfortunately, they are. Welcome. The studies that are coming out are actually showing this trend that is happening, and it's been happening for quite a bit of time, starting, as they said on Vox.com, starting back as early as the late 1980s, going into the early 90s, and it is now starting to show up that whites are actually self-segregating, okay? And they're calling it a reaction to a new migration, a reaction to a new suburban migration. Last year, researchers conducted an experiment in which they took a group of about 200 white people and primed some of them with different news articles. When the respondents were reminded about America's growing diversity, they showed more bias against Black people. So it wasn't just necessarily an immigration bias or a people of color bias, but it was specifically against Black people. A growing number of people are worried about the country becoming majority minority, including 1 in 3 Trump voters. And more than half of white Americans believe the country's way of life needs to be protected against foreign influences. About 84% of Trump supporters have felt that way. People like Trump were able to exploit exposure to race now that all these areas are exposed. The phrase way of life is imprecise, and perhaps it could indicate an allegiance to vague terms like freedom and liberty. This type of migration is perhaps the inevitable outcome of a diversifying nation that takes pride in its specific narrative of upward mobility. Starting in the 1970s, Asians and Latin Americans began arriving in the U.S. in large numbers. Now, most public school children are non-white. That would explain why there's all of a sudden this move to close down public schools, defund public schools, and send all of the money to private and charter schools. Because why? Well, if our children are not in these public schools anymore, why should we have to fund them? Why do we need to fund them? By 2020, most children in America will be non-white. Let that sink in. And for many people, welcome and hello. For many people, that is a frightening thing to them. Remember, this is daring dialogue, so we're not going to sugarcoat American thought. Hello, welcome. By 2020, most children will be non-white. Do I like Trump? Right now, I'm not concerned about his personality. I'm concerned about him leading our country with a character that is very, very questionable, which everyone should be concerned about. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want my president to cause an unnecessary war because of his words. By 2020, most children will be non-white, and by 2045, most people in America will be non-white. Okay? So this is based on the statistics that are out now, where they have been calculating immigration to U.S. since 1820 by origin. All right. So this is a article, you can find it on Vox.com, where it's talking about how white America is quietly self-segregating in an effort of what they call self-preservation. So even though many of the Americans that were interviewed said, hey, I'm for diversity, the reality is that the statistics bear out otherwise, that when they have an opportunity to move into a more diverse neighborhood, they actually move into a white neighborhood and make it more white. All right. So this is not my research. This is not my facts. This is actually what has been documented. All right. Welcome. So when people say they want diversity, but their actions show it's only a certain kind of diversity that they want. All right. So again, this was another study that was done in Illinois. The residents, they asked the residents to talk about where they live and where they would like to live and where they hope to live, okay? And they showed them a sample of the Chicago metropolitan area. The residents talked about how they ended up living where they do now, and they talked about the neighborhoods they've been to and the neighborhoods they haven't. And usually without prompting, they talk about race. Exactly, and that's kind of what the article is pointing out, is that Americans will tell you they don't mind diversity as long as it's not on their street block. Now, I happen to be, okay, I'll get back to that. The name of the article is White America is Quietly Self-Segregating, and you can find it on Vox.com. That's where the article is. I'm just reading parts of it because we have some more pieces to get into for this hour. All right. So the issue here is Americans say they want diversity and inclusion, but when it comes to their housing and where they live, they don't want it on their block. What is my name? My name is Shante Charles. Okay. So the article name again is White America is Quietly Self-Segregating. They're not coming out and saying this is not what we want. They're simply showing it by their actions. Their actions are speaking louder than their words. Concerning education, if you are familiar with the moral majority, those kinds of terms, the moral majority, part of their platform that many people have seemed to have forgotten about, part of their platform was segregation. Part of their platform was privatizing schools. Part of their platform was getting their children into private schools and charter schools away from other populations. Welcome. And so we seem to be going back to that. If we get the Secretary of Education that they have planned, I'm sorry, but she has no experience with public school. Her children have never been in public school. Her children have never received any grants or loans or anything like that. And she is adamantly against public schools. So if you put that person over a budget to give out loans to people who need them for college, junior college, what is going to happen to those people who actually need that monies? Would it actually be distributed to them? When she was asked, Betsy DeVos, when she was asked whether or not she would not be defunding schools, public schools, she could not give a straight answer. Now think about the millions of children that rely on free public education in this country. Let me give you some data on that. Okay, I'm gonna look it up for you. Free public education figures. See, Let's just look at the number and percentage of children who are getting free and eligible reduced lunch. In the United States, the last figures were put out in 2010, 2011. 23 million, 23.5 million children in the public school education system welcome. That translates to about 48% of children in public schools receive free or reduced lunch in schools. So that means almost half of the children in public schools, parents are working on a poverty or near poverty level income. That's what that means. So if they can't even afford a full price meal in public school, what would happen if you took away education from them altogether and parents had to then put their child in a charter school, or they had to pay a minimal fee for their child to go to a charter school, or they had to pay for private school? This should concern us. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This is a human rights issue. We have places all over the world right now that still do not grant access to education for all children. That should not be the potential case in the United States. All right. So those were our two news stories that we wanted to talk about today. Let's move on. Let's talk about this notion of one nation under God. Thank you. I hope you're beautiful too. I hope you're operating in a beautiful attitude today. One nation under God, his rule over your country. So let's take a look at a couple things about politics today, since this is our inaugural edition. And this actually was put out by Tony Evans. It's pretty thorough in helping people to see how politics and scripture and how politics and the Bible go together. He says, you cannot read the Bible and ignore the political realm. I actually happen to agree with that. The Bible is thick with politics. You have two books, 1 Kings and 2 Kings, that strictly deal with the rule and reign of government leaders. John the Baptist condemned the immoral conduct of Herod Antipas, which led to the prophet's execution. Mark 6:14 through 29. In Thessalonica, Paul and his companions were charged with committing treason against Rome for insisting that there is another King Jesus. What do I think about Obama? I believe that Obama helped those who committed financially to supporting him, as all politicians do. You know, Obama definitely was not a perfect president. But for example, the LGBTQ lobby got behind him and supported him, and he made the LGBTQ agenda happen down to the last wire, even with the commuting of the sentence of Chelsea Manning. So politicians they're going to tend to work hardest for the people who give them the most money. That's what I see. That's what I saw in President Obama. There were you know, different issues that he could have taken on, but for the most part, he took on the issues that the lobbyists who supported him wanted him to take on. All right. I think he did something good in terms of what he tried to do with prisons, the commuting of sentences for nonviolent offenses. I think that was good. But overall, presidents, politicians, they're going to go with the causes of the lobbyists. They're going to go with the causes of those who support them financially. I think for the Black community, I think Obama, yes, I have lots of single friends. I think that Obama could have done more, But because unfortunately most of the Black community was simply excited about a symbol, they didn't really ask more of him. Okay, so that's the thing. You have to demand something out of the people that represent you, not just them being a symbol of freedom. Okay, at this point in time, we don't need any more symbols, we need action. So let's go back. Tony Evans says here, in the greatest act of political and moral rebellion ever against God, the Antichrist will set up his worldwide government of pure evil, and he will rule the earth. Now, many people have said Obama was the Antichrist. He was not. Many people are now saying that Trump is the Antichrist. He is not. But will these people, or are these people setting us up in many different ways for the Antichrist to come in? Yes, they are. Each president, in my opinion, each president has a responsibility to forward a agenda that's a globalist agenda. So every president will play a different role in forwarding a globalist agenda. And if that is bringing us into war or bringing us into a sense of hopelessness to the point where we will just fall for anybody who comes in and says, I'm going to save the day, then that would be their role in the agenda. So if you are a believer today, your role should be to make sure that you are sane, to make sure that you are sober, of sober mind, to make sure that you are not a person that's capable of being manipulated, that you are not a blind follower, that you are not just believing everything that comes out of someone's mouth, but that you are testing what is being said. You're testing it up against scripture. You're testing it up against the Holy Spirit. Now, many people are upset today, unfortunately, with Trump supporters who are enamored by Trump. They can't see anything wrong in him. They can't see any faults. They're not looking at him with a critical eye. But I propose to you today that the very same attitude that Trump supporters have towards him was the very same attitude that many Americans had towards Obama. They did not look at all of his policies with a critical eye. They did not read up on him. They did not research him. Had they done that, they wouldn't be so disappointed by what he did not accomplish in his presidency, because he made it very clear in his writings what he was about. So, I look at what is happening and I say to myself, we have so many Black Americans who are angry at the adoration that people are giving Trump, but they don't realize they gave the same adoration to Obama. The same adoration. So we don't need to be, hypocritical. We don't need to be hypocritical in how we are viewing this. Okay. So that's the deal. And so when people do not look at a candidate with a critical eye, and they simply just, ride the wave of excitement that their candidate has won, and then they start getting hit with the results of picking someone, and they didn't look at that candidate with a critical eye, buyer's remorse is inevitable. Okay? Buyer's remorse will be inevitable. And so, again, the same kind of euphoria that people had with Obama being elected is the same kind of euphoria that people have that are Trump supporters. So my question is, can you see clearly? Can you see that same euphoria that people had when Obama was elected? Can you see that same euphoria now that Trump has been elected? Because the reality is, some of the same reasons why people chose Obama is the same reasons why people chose Trump. And most people do not want to admit that part of it had to do with their quote unquote race, because we know race is a social construct. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it for anybody that comes on my broadcast. A lot of white evangelical Christians put white above Jesus. They did. The results bear it out that they chose their whiteness above their faith. Other than that, there's no reason, there's no way you can explain electing someone as factually immoral as the current president. Because if you say that you're the party of moral or morality, or you say you're the party of family values, there's no way you can logically elect him and overlook his factual immorality and still call yourself the party of morality and family values. I know I'm not going to get any amens, but it's okay. I'm just going to tell you the truth. All right. So take a look at what Tony Evans says here again about our country. Because God is the sovereign of his universe, it follows that he is intimately concerned with the political affairs of the nations. Psalm 22 and 28 declares, "The kingdom is the Lord's and he rules over the nations." There is nothing that happens in the governments of men that does not flow out of the sovereign rule of God. The king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. Now, there are many well wishes concerning President Trump. Many people are saying, well, he is immoral. He's proven and shown himself to be immoral, but hopefully he will have the ability to be turned around morally. Well, in order for that to happen, he's got to first demonstrate that he wants to turn. In order for that to happen, it would show in his cabinet picks, it would show in his company that he's keeping that there's a possibility that he can be turned. Now, we know that God can work with immoral kings to still accomplish his will. He's done it throughout history. All right. But we're not going to wish a person into salvation, and we're not going to put a false salvation on a person to make ourselves feel better about who we have in office. Okay. All through the Bible, we see God placing people strategically in the political realm. He moved Joseph into authority in Egypt. You can find that in Genesis 41. He elevated Daniel to a position of great influence in Babylon and later in Persia. You can find that in Daniel 1, 8 through 21, Daniel 2, 46 through 49, and Daniel 6, 1 through 3. God also placed Nehemiah in the Persian government so he could rebuild his community with government support. He also placed Esther as queen in Persia and Deborah as a judge in Israel to accomplish his agenda. So does God place godly people in authority in ungodly governments? Yes, but just let's make sure that it's God placing you there. Let's make sure that if you are being placed in government, that you're not compromising God's call for you to be there. If God has called you to the political realm, let's make sure that you're not there eating at the table of ungodliness, and that you're not silent when you need to speak. That you actually speak up for righteousness while you're there. Again, some people got upset because certain people went to perform for the inauguration and certain people chose not to go. Again, if that is not your arena, if that is not your call, then no, you should not be there. If you don't understand politics, if you don't understand political espionage, you probably shouldn't be there. It's not your arena. But if you are called to that arena, then you have a responsibility to represent the word of the Lord in that arena and not compromise, because there will be plenty of opportunity to compromise. All right. So let's keep moving here. I'm getting to the halfway point of my broadcast, and I want to make sure that I get to our pieces about the Constitution today. All right, so let's talk real quickly about forms of governing, forms of governing. God has given us the freedom to choose whether or not we will be one nation under him, whether we will recognize his rule and operate underneath it. But with that choice comes either God bless America or not. God only promises to bless the nation who recognizes his authority. Let's say that again. God only promises to bless the nation who recognizes his authority. Freedom means you get to control the choice, but because God is sovereign ruler over his creation, you don't get to control the consequences of your choice. All right? God has made it clear that he will allow the natural consequences of our choices that go against him. He is the ultimate authority, and everyone else is delegated authority for good or for bad. A lot of times people think, oh, this person won. Maybe it might be an evil person or someone we consider ungodly. And we'll say, oh, this person won. It must be the will of God. No. God allows the will of the people, but we can't fix the consequences for the will of the people. So if we choose something that is ungodly, then the consequences of that ungodly choice is going to roll out on a nation. Okay? So if we chose poorly, welcome. If we chose poorly, then we're going to see the consequences of that choice roll out upon the nation. We can choose our decisions as a nation, but in doing so, we're also inviting our consequences. And I think that was something that was missed probably the entire 2 years leading up to the election. People kept saying, if this is what you choose, these are the consequences that are going to roll out. And people just kept saying, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. It'll eventually, play itself out. Let's wait to see what happens. Let's wait to see what he does. Whatever he does is going to be the consequence of the choices people made November 9th, 2016. Okay? Because we don't live in a theocracy. We live in a republic. So that means people by their will made a choice. And because of that choice, we will see the consequences roll out. I hope that everybody understands that, okay? These are forms of government given by God. The first and foundational form of government is self-government. The goal of self-government is to govern oneself according to the principles and precepts found in God's law. When individuals are living life in light of an attitude of self-government, then there is less need for anyone or anything else to govern them. So when you have yourself under control, nobody needs to, we see this with how our law is enacted. People get put behind bars. Why? They call it a correctional institute, a federal correctional institute. They get put behind bars. Why? Because they fail to self-govern themselves according to the laws of the land. People wind up in mental institutions. Why? Because they lose mental faculty to do what? Self-govern. So again, self-governing oneself according to the principles and precepts found in God's law. When you have proper self-governing, there is less of a need for anyone or anything else to come along and govern you. So the first form of governing is self-governing, getting yourself under control. The next type of government that God prescribes is family government. Family government after self. God established the family as the foundation of civilization. The Bible tells us that Christ is the head of the husband is the head of the wife, and parents are the head over their children. That's family government. Scripture goes on to lay out the governing principles in relation to the marriage covenant and family unit. So you got self-government, you have family government. Here's the third one. God ordains ecclesia government. And somebody said, what is ecclesia? Ecclesia is a word that is often confused with the word church. Church and ecclesia are not the same. Okay, that's another lesson for another time, but make sure you research the difference between church and ecclesia. Ecclesia, E-C-C-L-E-S-I-A. Somebody type that on the screen for me. Ecclesia. All right. The church leaders, as members of the ecclesia, governing body set up by Jesus on his behalf, are to govern matters that apply to the ecclesia or the members as needed, and serve as the moral conscience of the government. This role is crucial since the progress of a nation is directly related to the state of its morality. So there are governmental leaders that pull on the ecclesia to help them in matters of morality. But what happens when your ecclesia is immoral, or your ecclesia is not following Christ, and you pull them in for advice? That's something we have to be concerned about. All right. The fourth system of government instituted by God in his kingdom rule is civil government. So I'm going to go over those again. There's four. There's self-government, family government, ecclesia government, and civil government. Okay. Civil government is the system which has been set in place to do what? Maintain a safe, just, righteous environment in which freedom can flourish and occur. It is a representative system designed to manage society in an orderly fashion. Civil government is to support, not replace, the other institutions of government, family and ecclesia. It's to support family government and ecclesia. Most people don't know that. Most people at this point are worshiping their government as God. But government was never supposed to replace family government, and it was never supposed to replace the ecclesia. I'm going to say that one more time. Russia's cool. I don't have any problem with Russia. All right. Civil government was never supposed to replace family government or ecclesia. Never. And when you have that happening, when you make government your God, you are going to feel the consequences of making government your God. Okay? So civil government is to support, not replace the other two institutions of government, so that self-government and therefore maximum freedom can be experienced. Most people think that freedom is do what you want. No, freedom is the responsibility to do what is beneficial to yourself, to your family, to your ecclesia, and to your civil government. That's what freedom is. It's not willy-nilly. It's not, I can do anything I want at the harm of other people. So we got to get this right. We got to get this together in our understanding, especially as we move forward. All right. Last reading for today is going to come from our U.S. Constitution. Fascinating facts about our U.S. Constitution. Things that people may not know about our U.S. Constitution, and then we are going to wrap up for today. So let me first start with some fascinating facts about the U.S. Constitution that many people don't know. All right. The U.S. Constitution itself actually has 4,440 words to be exact. It is the oldest and shortest written constitution of any major government in the world. There are several countries that have looked at our constitution and actually have pulled from our constitution to help them with their constitution. All right. Thomas Jefferson did not sign the Constitution. He was in France during the Constitutional Convention, where he served as the U.S. minister to France. John Adams was serving as the U.S. Minister to Great Britain during the Constitutional Convention, so neither of them attended. All right. The Constitution was penned by a man named Jacob Shallis, a Pennsylvania General Assembly clerk, for only $30 or $683 in US dollars today. So less than $1,000 they paid this gentleman to pen the Constitution. Since 1952, the Constitution has been on display in the National Archives building in DC. Currently, all 4 pages are displayed behind protective glass framed with titanium. To preserve the parchment's quality, the cases contain sorry about that, my Periscope viewers. Let's get us back on with our Periscope viewers here. All right, we are back on. Sorry about that, my Periscope peoples. Thank you guys for coming back in. Sorry about that. So as we were talking, the Constitution is actually behind protective glass framed with titanium to preserve the parchment's quality. The cases contain argon gas and are kept at 67 degrees Fahrenheit with a relative humidity of 40%. So you're not just going to go in and snatch up the Constitution, the original document, and run off, in other words. Constitution Day is actually celebrated on September 17th, anniversary of the framers signing. This is very interesting to note because some white supremacists have actually already noted this, and it's going to be important for us to understand what this actually means. It says the Constitution does not set forth requirements for the right to vote. I'm going to say that again. The Constitution does not set forth requirements for the right to vote. As a result, at the outset of the Union, only male property owners could vote. African Americans were not considered citizens, and women were excluded from the electoral process. Native Americans were not given the right to vote until 1924. So, in other words, Native Americans, African Americans, and women are only an amendment to the Constitution. And as we know, just like with prohibition, a amendment was written to ban alcohol. They wrote another amendment to bring alcohol back. So I want you to think about that. If it's an amendment, that means that somebody can write another amendment to cancel the previous one. So think about that. All right. Patrick Henry was elected as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, but declined because he smelled a rat. Because of his poor health, Benjamin Franklin needed help to sign the Constitution. As he did so, tears streamed down his face. The oldest person to sign the Constitution was Ben Franklin at 81. The youngest was Jonathan Dayton of New Jersey at 26. When the Constitution was signed, the United States population was only 4 million people. It is now more than 300 million. Philadelphia was the nation's largest city at the time with 40,000 inhabitants. The first time the formal term the United States of America was used was in the Declaration of Independence. It took 100 days to actually frame the Constitution. In other words, to decide what they would keep and what they would not keep. George Washington and James Madison were the only presidents who signed the Constitution. The word democracy does not appear once in the Constitution. Some people don't realize that. the word democracy does not appear once in the Constitution. Part of that reason is because we are a republic, not a democracy. All right. So let's go on to my next section. I found this to be interesting. These are amendments that have been proposed. These are amendments that have been proposed but never ratified. Okay? One of the enduring features of our Constitution is its flexibility. At the time of its ratification, as we said, the population of the United States was only around 4 million people. Today, that population exceeds 300 million. From the time of its adoption, the Constitution has only changed 27 times. Actually, since 1791, with the inclusion of the Bill of Rights, it has only really changed 17 times. Extraordinary in light of radical shifts in technology, infrastructure, population, and other changes that have occurred in this country during the last 200-something years. The framers of the Constitution realized that no document could cover all of the changes that would take place in the future. To ensure its longevity, they developed procedures for amending it. In order for an amendment to be passed, a number of steps must be taken as outlined in Article 5 of the Constitution. The article provides 2 methods for the proposal and 2 methods for the ratification of an amendment. An amendment may be proposed by 2/3 vote of the House of Representatives and the Senate, or a national convention called by Congress at the request of 2/3 of the state legislature. The latter procedure has never been used. The amendment may then be ratified by 3/4 of state legislatures, 38 states, or special conventions called by 3/4 of the state. The 21st Amendment was the only one to be adopted in this way. However, it is within the power of Congress to decide which method of ratification will be used. The time limit for the ratification process of 7 years was first applied to the 18th Amendment. There have been more than 10,000 amendments proposed in Congress since 1789, and fewer than 1% of them have received enough support to actually go through the constitutional ratification process. The following is a very limited list of some of the proposed amendments that never left the halls of Congress. Well, now I'm going to read some of these amendments to you all, and some of you all are probably going to be concerned because we have now, with the control of both sides, by those who don't see America as being great right now, we have the possibility that some of these could actually be re-presented and ratified. So please pay attention. Some of the proposed amendments for this country, some of the proposed amendments that were put out there and never ratified. In 1876, there was an attempt to abolish the United States Senate. There was also the forbidding of religious leaders from occupying a governmental office or receiving federal funding. So think about the number of religious leaders who occupy a governmental office right now, and think about the number of programs that receive federal funding. Wouldn't have been happening had that been ratified. An executive council of 3 to replace the office of president was presented in 1878. Can you imagine our country being run by 3 people? Wow. 1893, renaming our nation the United States of the Earth. Think about that. 1893, abolishing the United States Army and Navy. It was put on the table to abolish the Army and the Navy. I want you to think about that. 1894, acknowledging that the Constitution recognized God and Jesus Christ as the supreme authorities in human affairs. That was put up for ratification. Here's another one. 1912, making marriage between races illegal. They wanted to make that a part of the Constitution. 1914, finding divorce to be illegal. Oh, we would have had a different America had in 1914 that been ratified. 1916, all acts of war should be put to a national vote. Anyone voting yes had to register as a volunteer for service in the Army. OMG. Can you imagine that? In 1916, had that been ratified, and everybody who wanted to go to war, they would have actually had to sign up as a volunteer in the Army. That would have stopped a lot of wars, because people will say, let's go to war, but they don't want to send themselves, and they don't want to send their children. 1933, an attempt to limit personal wealth to $1 million. That means no Bill Gates and no Steve Jobs. 1936, an attempt to allow the American people to vote on whether or not the United States should go to war. That came up again in 1936. 1938, the forbidding of drunkenness in the United States in all of its territories. I would have loved to see that one. 1947, the income tax maximum for an individual not to exceed 25%. 1948, the right of citizens to segregate themselves from others. So they were proposing the right for you to segregate and self-segregate yourself in 1948. 1971, American citizens should have the alienable right to an environment free of pollution. So those, as they said, were just a limited list of some of the things that came up for ratification for our Constitution that never left the halls of Congress. If you take a look at some of them, we would have a very different country than we do right now had some of those things actually made it through. All right. I love Jesus. I'm for Jesus. That's what I'm for. All right. So let's take a look at Article 2, Section 1, the executive branch, as our new president is being sworn in. The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He shall hold this office during the term of 4 years, and together with the vice president chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. Section 4, the Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. And we know that the Electoral College actually met in December to cast their votes for the president. Section 5, no person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. Section 6, in case of the removal of the president from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both of the president and vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a president shall be elected. Now, this was changed by the 25th Amendment. All right, listen to this. The president shall at stated times receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected. He shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Now, this is what people call the emoluments clause, meaning that the president is not supposed to be receiving extra money during his time in office, which is one of the things that people keep saying is a conflict of interest, because our president being sworn in is refusing to put his assets into a blind trust. So this is one of the reasons why people keep saying that on day one that he swears in, he could already be in violation of the Constitution. But those who love him are not paying attention to the Constitution. All right. Section 8, before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Section 2, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons or offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. So again, the president has the right to grant reprieves or pardons for offenses against the United States, which we saw the commutation of several hundred sentences as our former president left office. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. He has the power to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. And he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law, but the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior offices as they think proper in the president alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The president shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Section 3. He shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasion, convene both houses or either of them in a case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment. He may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all of the officers of the United States. Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So that is, I've read for you in your hearing the office of the president. So let's look at Amendment 25, and we're actually going to be done for today. The 25th Amendment was proposed on July 6, 1965. Hello, hello, hello to all who have entered. And ratified on February 10, 1967. In the case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Whenever there is a vacancy in the office of the vice president, the president shall nominate a vice president who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. Whenever the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the vice president as acting president. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either of the principal officers of the executive departments or other such body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. Thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he can resume powers and duties of his office unless the vice president and majority of either the principal officers of the executive department or of such other body as Congress may by law provide transmit within 4 days to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Therefore, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. If the Congress within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by 2/3 vote of both houses that the president is unable to discharge his powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the power and duties of his office. So what does this mean? This means if it is decided that the president is unable to discharge his powers and he tries to resume his powers, and within 4 days, both sides of the House say, no, you're not mentally able to resume your powers, then it then goes into a decision of a vote. And so literally, it can be determined by 2/3 vote that both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office and the vice president can remain president. Now, what are the likelihood chances of that happening with this presidency? I'll let you think about that. So, I hope you got something out of today's broadcast. I hope you learned something that you didn't know about the Constitution. I hope you understand better the office of the president and what he can and cannot do. And I hope you understand what are the possibilities of him being already in violation of his oath before he even takes it. So again, reading is fundamental. I recommend every citizen get a copy of the U.S. Constitution. This one just happens to have some added fascinating facts, but get a copy of the Constitution, read it, learn it, understand it, carry it with you, because you might need to inform someone of your rights, especially if they haven't read the Constitution. All right. So you all take care. Thank you guys for joining me for this inauguration edition of Daring Dialogues. Have a great and wonderful day. Stay out of trouble. Stay out of arguments. Live in peace. Know that God is sovereign and he's in control. As long as Jesus is king over your life, it really doesn't matter who's president. You all take care and God bless. Take care and God bless.